In this tutorial, we're going to dabble in machine learning using JavaScript. To do this, we'll use ml5, which is a friendly library to make machine learning more approachable. You can learn more about them on their website. We'll build an app that takes training data to create a neural network that learns whether a color is reddish, greenish, or bluish. Then, when we select a color from a color picker, the neural network is going to be able to tell us whether the color we selected is reddish, bluish, or greenish. Let's get started. To begin, we'll download the starter code from GitHub. The link to this code is in the description below. This starter code is based on the starter template I created in my previous video, which is basically a Vue 3 app running Vite and has some things like ESLint, Prettier, Tailwind CSS, and Vue Router installed and configured. The addition in this code is the data.json file, which includes training data on colors. Now, as we clone this repo, keep in mind we need to make sure that we check out the start tag, because as I complete this project, I'm going to be committing the final code here as well. So we'll go ahead and copy this and then clone. And now we can cd into our project folder and say git checkout tags/start. Great, and we're ready to go. We can do npm install. And then we can do npm run dev. Perfect. Next, we'll install ml5. We can do this in a few ways. There are a few options outlined in the docs. Feel free to use whichever one works best for you. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to install it through npm. Keep in mind, however, that the npm package is not production ready at this point and will throw some errors. We'll force resolve those, and for the purposes of this demo, it should be fine, but something for you to keep in mind. Let's see how that plays out. So we go npm install ml5. And so we see here that it is unable to resolve some dependencies. And it's mostly to do with TensorFlow and some other libraries as well. So to resolve these, we'll do npm install ml5 -- force. And so we get a bunch of warnings about a lot of these libraries like universal sentence and face mesh and all of that. Now, we're not going to be using any of these, so we're not overly concerned, but just something to keep in mind that this is not production ready. However, for the purposes of just learning ml5, this is very convenient for us, and we'll go ahead and use this for now. Great, so with ml5 installed, we can finally open up our code editor and start writing some code. So in our code, we can see that we have a fresh Vite application running, and if we go to the browser, there it is. So we want to start by creating a module through which we can use ml5. So under the src folder, we'll create use ml5.js. So we start by importing ml5 from ml5. And then we're going to set up a variable here for our neural network. And we're going to set up some options for it. These are the neural network options, NN options. Again, you can find these in the documentation. We'll set debugging to false. And then we're going to set up some training options as well. And we're going to go with the default as well. Don't worry about these too much. If you like, you can read up about them. Just some options on how to tweak what you are configuring the neural network to do. Next, we will initialize and train the neural network. And so to do that, we're going to do 4 things. We're going to initialize the neural network. We are going to add data to the neural network. We are going to normalize the data, and then we're going to train the neural network using that data. Great, so let's do that. So we begin by creating a function, and we want to export this function because we're going to use it in our home component. And we'll call this init because we're going to initialize the neural network, and we're going to take the data from that JSON file. We'll pass that in here. So we'll do all of these things in here. So we start by initializing. So that NN that we declared above, we're going to use that, and we'll say neural network. And then here we're going to pass in the neural network options that we had up here. Great, so that will initialize our neural network. Now we can add data to it. So for that, what we're going to do is we'll use a for each loop and go over the data that we're going to get from the data.json file later. And for that, what we need to do is we need to define the inputs. So the data file, if we look at it, gives us R, G, and B colors, and then a label called color, which will tell us, since this is heavily skewed towards red, this is a reddish color. So what we need to do here is we need to tell the neural network what those data points are for input. So our three inputs are R, which will be item.r, because we are traversing and every item in the data input that we take. For every item, we're going to look at that and we're going to say item.r is our R input. For our G input, we have item.g, and for our B input, we have item.b. Next, we'll define output. And this is just simply color, and that will be item.color, because if we look at this, this is the output that we want, which is color. So that's our data. And now we're going to add this to our neural network, and we will give it the inputs and the output. So for every item in data, we're going to define the R, G, and B inputs, and we're going to tell it what the output is, which is color, and then we're going to add it to the neural network right there. Great, so now we just normalize the data. Again, this is a normalized data. Now this is a concept that you can learn more about. I'm not going to touch too much upon it. Essentially, it just is a way of making all of the data readable for the neural network in the proper format that it requires. And then we're going to train. So here we're going to pass the training options that we defined above, and then finished training is a callback. So when you have your neural network and you train it and you give it some training options, when it's done training, it does a callback to this function here, whatever you define here. So we're going to make a function called finish training, which is called after the neural network is done training. So let's make that function as well. So we'll say this is the callback for when training finishes. And we don't need to export this one because it is only called from within this file. For now, we'll just console.log finished training. And that should be good. So now we want to train our neural network, and we're going to do that from our home page. So we'll go to the home component file, and under our script setup, we're going to import the use ml5 file that we just created. So we'll do import star as use ml5 from use ml5. And if you're not familiar with this star notation syntax, essentially what this means is import all of the exports that are found in this file. So under use ml5, everything that we have exported will be available over here as use ml5 dot and then the name of the export. So in this case, init, for example. And that's what we're going to do now. So now we've imported this, and we also need our data. So we'll import data. Done that. Great, so now we can initialize our ml5 neural network. So we'll do use ml5.init, and we'll pass it that data. And let's save that and go over to Chrome, hit refresh. Now, if you didn't actually see it work in Chrome the first time around, just go ahead and restart your server. That does happen sometimes. Since Vite is an experimental stage still, there are some hot reload issues that you may run into every now and then. Just go ahead and restart the server and it should be good. And so now that we've done that, I'll just go ahead and refresh again. We can see that our ml5 library is loaded, and we get our finished training message from the callback, which means that our neural network has been trained. Next, we want to give this neural network some input and see how well it can do in predicting its result. So we'll go over to our use ml5 file, and we'll add a function called classify. So here we're going to make a classification with this function. We're going to want to export this function because we're going to use it from the home component, and we'll call it classify, and it takes in input value. and we'll simply call classify on the neural network, and we'll give it the input. And this also has a callback, and we'll call that handle results. So when it's done with the classification, it will call the handle results function, which we'll make next. So we'll say handle the results of the classification, and we don't need to export this one. We'll do handle results. Now this, if there is an error, it will throw an error. Otherwise, it will give us the result. So how do we deal with that? We'll say if error, and we'll just console.error and return. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and console.log the result. So let's go ahead and test this. We'll go to our home component. So over here, we'll define some input. We'll just do 255 red, 0 green, 0 blue. And so now what we'll do is we'll say use ml5.classify, and we'll pass that input and see what happens. Let's go over back to our Chrome. I'll refresh this. And so we have our result. Interesting. Notice that our finished training happens after the result appears, and that's because of the way the callbacks work. While we're still waiting for the model to finish training, we've already made the classification, and this finished before the model trained. So what happened is that our answers are not very good because we gave it 255 red, and it should have been a very high confidence of red. However, we only have a 36% confidence in that this is a red color, which is very low. That means the model hasn't properly trained yet. So there's a few ways to fix this. We could do async await promises, etc. For the purposes of this test, because this is just a simple test we're doing right now to see if our model is working, and the final product is not going to need that, I'll just go ahead and do kind of a hack here, and we'll use a set timeout function to do that. Although this is, of course, again, not the right way to do it, but just to prove the concept here, we'll do set timeout, use ml5.classify, and we'll pass in the input, and we've given it a 2-second delay here. So what this really means is just wait for 2 seconds and then call classify. By this point, the model will have finished training. So we'll save this. Now when we go back and hit refresh, we can see it waits, it finishes training, and then it gives us the result. And there you go. It has a 90% confidence that this is a red color, which is accurate because we passed it these input values in which red was 255. Now we'll get rid of these hard-coded values and use a color picker instead to get the input from the user. So we'll go up here and we'll add a color picker. So that's going to be an input type color. We'll give it the name color as well. We'll give it a default value, starting value. It'll be a reddish value here. And then on change event, we want to call the function color picked, which we're just going to add in a minute. So when the user selects a color, this event is triggered, and that will call this function, which we're going to add. Just for clarity, we're going to add a label here just to make it look nice. We'll add some margin on the left and call it color. I think that should be good. So we'll just have a look in Chrome. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now we'll add that color picked function. So we'll say function color picked, and this will take in the event, which is passed when this is the event. So when this function is called, that event payload will be available here through event. We're just going to see it in a second here. So we'll take the input from the user. We want to save that. So that will be under event.target.value. So that will be the value of the color that the user has picked in the color picker. And for just to test it, we'll just log it out to the console right now and have a look. Back to Chrome. We'll choose a color here. And yeah, we're getting it in the console. We're seeing that it's a hex value. So next, we're going to have to convert that hex value to RGB values, because that's what we need to send to our ML model. It requires RGB values, so we're going to convert this hex to RGB.
So now we're going to create a utility that converts to RGB. So we'll call it convert to RGB.js. We're going to export a function, convert to RGB, and take in a hex code value. Now this hex code value, we want to make sure that it is 6 characters long. So we're going to strip away the hash code of the hex. We're going to strip this away when we pass it to this function. We're only going to pass the values. And if it's not 6 characters long, we'll just error out. Only 6-digit hex codes allowed. And then here, so what we're going to do is we're going to use regular expressions. So I'll try to explain it a little bit. I'm not very good with regular expressions, but hopefully it'll make sense. So I'll just put in the regular expression here, and then I'll explain it. /G. And so a good way to learn regular expressions is actually I've found that this website is very, very helpful. So if we take our regular expression and we paste it in here, and in fact, if we go and copy our hex code and we paste that in here as well, it'll tell us what it's doing, what this regular expression is doing to this. So every single, so we see here the slash indicates the start and the end of the regular expression. The dot means match any character except line breaks. So just all of the characters, they want to match them. And then 1 to 2 says, so essentially what this means is break it into tokens of 2 characters each. And G means it is a global search. So that's pretty much it. And what this does is it breaks this hex code into 3 pieces, each one being 2 characters long. So, and what that's going to do is put it into this array. So now what we're going to do is create an object of R, G, and B. And so if we notice, we have these 3 items in the array. And what we want is actually, we want these to be integers. And right now they're not. We have C8 and then 19 and 19, but these are strings. So what we're going to do is parse int the RGB array, the first item, and we're going to use base 16 because that's a hex value. So we'll do that again for parse int array of the second item, and again base 16, and then here we can do that. And oopsie, we'll do blue. Cool, so that should give us our object, and we'll return it. And that should do it. So now we can pass a hex code to this function, and it will return an object which will contain R, G, and B values. So now back to our home component, we're going to import this utility that we just created, convert to RGB, convert to RGB. And then what we're going to do is in our color picked function, we want to strip away the pound sign that we had, the hashtag sign here. We want to strip that away. So we just want the hex code. So here we'll say event.target.value dot substring. So we want to not use the first element, which is the 0 element. We don't want to use that. We just want 1 through 7. So that should give us just this hex code. And then what we want to do is convert that to RGB. So the input here instead is going to be convert to RGB. We're going to call that function, and we're going to pass it the hex code. And that should give us the RGB value, and then we'll go ahead and log that out and see what that does. So now if we come back here, we'll just refresh to clear out the console. We're finished training, so we'll select this. So we have 217, 13, and 13. And there we go. That works just fine. So now what we can actually just go ahead and classify this. We'll do use ml5.classify, and we can use this input. Let's try that again. And we'll take a bluish color this time. And there we go. We got our RGB values, and then, yeah, high confidence on the bluish color, so that worked. So finally, what we want to now do is show this result on the page. So when we select a color, instead of just looking at it in the console, we should see here whether it's bluish or greenish. So in order to do that, we're going to go over to our use ml5.js file. And first and foremost, we're going to use ref from view. So this is based on the new Vue 3 composition API. And then if you recall, we had a callback which handles the results. This is where the result is being logged out to the console. And the result, when we get the result, it's always the first element is the one which always has the highest confidence. So that we want the label of that element. So in this case, it was bluish because this was the highest confidence. So we would want to print out bluish over here. So in order to do that, we're going to store the label of the item with the highest confidence in color label. And this will be a reference initially to an empty string. And then when the result is available to us, we will put in the value of color label as the first item of the result, the label of the first item of the result. We're going to take that and we're going to put it in color label. Now we're exporting this, so this is going to be available to us in the home component where we have brought in our ml5. We brought in star from ml5, so all the exports in use ml5 are available to us, including color label. So now what we can do here is use a computed property, and again, another Vue 3. Well, computed properties were available in Vue 2 as well. We're going to use the composition API computed property here. So we're going to import computed from Vue. And what we want to do is we'll create a computed property called color label. And the reason we use a computed property is so that when it changes, it automatically gets updated. So we'll say use ml5.colorLabel.value. And there we go. So now every time this changes, we will have access to it, to the value of it. And that's it. We can now start using this color label in our template up here. So we'll go ahead and add a div. And we'll do some styling on this. We'll give it some margin top, and we'll make it a little bigger. That should be good enough. And we'll say color label. And I think we are done. So now if we go ahead and select a reddish color, great, it says reddish. And we'll go ahead and select a bluish color. That worked as well. Finally, we'll do greenish. Great. So we did a lot of things. Let's recap. We used ml5.js and we initialized a neural network. And then we added data points to that neural network to train it. And the data that we used was from this data.json file, which has RGB color values and a label, letting us know if that specific color is reddish, greenish, or bluish. And then once this neural network was trained, we added a color picker and allowed the user to select a color from the color picker. We converted that hex code into RGB and then passed that RGB value to the ML5 neural network model that we trained, and we were able to classify the label for that color that was selected by the color picker and display the output here on the browser. So hopefully this gives you an idea on how to use ML5 and gets you thinking around the lines of what you could build using it. It really depends on the data set that you have. Based on the data set, you could train a neural network to make predictions. For example, you could generate some fake data around a cellular network, which has different cell phone plans, and based on the usage of the user on minutes and data, you could make a prediction around whether they are likely to renew their contract or not. Or you could have e-commerce data around sales, and you could determine whether or not a user may return for a second time to the website or not. These are just some examples. Get creative with it, have some fun. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for watching.